Ready for action.
What's good, YouTube? Thanks for stopping in for episode 10 of the Ready for Action podcast. On today's episode, we have Forrest Sealey. He's the executive director for Veterans for Child Rescue, an organization whose main mission and focus is to fight and stop the trafficking of children that's happening right now in the country. Make sure to leave a like, drop a comment so I know how you feel about the episode. Any feedback you guys can provide would be much appreciated. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you guys are notified anytime we have a new episode or there's a new short that comes out on the channel so you guys can enjoy. Other than that, let's get to the episode.
You can start.
That these guys are big time researchers, and so I'm going to start. I kind of gave them some ideas of what I want. There's some things that I think we should do as a society. And one of the things that Craig pointed out was the scorecard. If you take a policymaker, a judge, what is their position on human trafficking of kids, on certain things? How do they vote? Because you have people campaign and you have people talk the talk. Well, how do we measure that they walk the walk? And I would really love to see a website where we can have this report card where you can go put in somebody's name. You know, for example, you could put in Kim Ogg, which is the attorney, as the Harris County District Attorney, and get her record on various topics. Go to the city council, go to the mayor, you go to the state legislation, and pull these people up and say, what did you vote on? Yay, what they call yay, nay, or there's a term for it for non-vote. Now, but a lot of people don't realize it. You know, when he was a senator, he took over a Senate seat in Illinois. He took over that Senate seat, and he had the lowest percentages of voting as a senator. He didn't have a very long career as a senator, so there was a lot of conjecture. How did this guy become president when he had very little experience? He didn't vote on anything while he was a senator, and he didn't even get voted into that spot. He was appointed because the prior senator was up to some shenanigans. He was, I don't remember exactly. I know he was married to Jerry Ryan, and they were doing some, I don't know if you know who Jerry Ryan is. Oh my God, she is an actress, and she was on the Star Trek with Picard.
Okay.
Her name was 7 of 9, and she wore this bodysuit that made every man
go crazy.
Yeah. It was like kind of the Princess Leia of, the next generation.
Gotcha. Okay. You said Star Trek. That's
Star Trek. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So she, but they were married, and they were doing some, according to stories I've read on her, that she was dissatisfied with the direction their physical relationship was going.
This is the previous senator to Obama.
And that's how Obama, they booted that guy out and they brought him in.
What state was he the senator for? Do you remember?
Illinois.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, he's from Chicago. Yeah. That's interesting. So this radio show that you're going on Saturday.
I was on last Saturday.
They're implementing this kind of policy?
He was talking about the level of research that he was doing. For example, one of the things that he had shared with me.
So they're going to be researching the previous voting history of all these senators and kind of creating a database where people can go in and say, I want to see what Dan Crenshaw voted for all of these policies. Boom, pulls it up, and then it tells his voting history of all the topics and all the policies. Is that kind of what they're doing?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, they're looking at doing that. I planted the seed. We're working on the report card. But when he told me how smart his team was, I said, well, wait a minute. You guys are smarter than us. You want to help us do it. So they're entertaining that idea, which I like. But I think this is needed because today, if you go to the evolution of voting, the first president I voted for was Ronald Reagan. I was in high school. I remember running track. It was during track season. And they announced over the radio that somebody tried to shoot him. I'm out in the track, and the PA comes. And later on, we learned what happened, and he runs for election again. Thinking, I voted for him because he got shot and he lived. And my parents voted for him. Those were the reasons why.
Yeah.
So over time, you learn how to do a little bit of listening. I mean, in my time, it was radio and TV and the paper. Typically during the election cycle, they would give a write-up on all of the policymakers, and you could read. Now, today, there's so much information out there. You know, I think there's a problem that we're going to start to see with information. You know, if you go and read the book, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, which was written by Boone Cutler and General Michael Flynn, they talk about we are currently in a war. People don't realize this. We're in World War III. What does that mean? Well, first generation warfare was knives and spears. Second was gunpowder. It evolved all the way to fourth, which is nuclear power. Now we're in fifth. We're in an informational war. And there's so much evidence of this, all the way to the point there we are fighting with AI. Okay, now the latest release is AI. Well, if you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, it came out about 2 years ago. And they revealed, these were high-ranking folks at Twitter, Facebook. They were testifying in public. And they talked that the average youth has at least 3 AIs at that time talking to them. And one of the things that was revealed, for example, they would say that you'd have an AI would set up a rally for a white supremacist group on, Main Street and, Washington Avenue in some city. And the opposite corner, BLM would set up another event. The AI would do that, knowing if you put these two in close proximity,
there's going
to be trouble.
Riot.
So, if you recall, back during 2020, I think it was, there was reports, you'd have people going by and there would be a public space in like Chicago or some large metropolis, and there would be pallets of bricks just randomly.
I heard about that. That was during the BLM riots and the protests and stuff like that.
How weird was that?
I heard a few theories on it. But one of the things I heard was that police officers within the city were the ones that they saw unloading bricks and putting up pallets in certain areas of town wherever these riots were going on. Don't know how accurate that is. I never really looked into it too deeply, but I've heard multiple stories about people said they saw people coming with pallets of bricks right in an alley, ducked away maybe 5 feet from where people were walking on the main protesting route, and then setting these bricks up. And I also heard that it wasn't protesters necessarily that started inciting the violence. I heard it was plants that were there to stir up the people to get these protests to start turning into riots pretty early on after the whole George Floyd situation and stuff like that.
I think that what's interesting that you point out, we tend to have these blanketed statements that we say. For example, when they went through the riots and defund the police, they basically just made a blanket statement that all police are bad. Now, if what you witnessed or what you studied or revealed to you, that certainly was a bad actor that was amongst the police force. And I think that just about any entity, even ones that we revere, they've got some bad actors. I've seen, back then, what's interesting for me, that's what got me into TikTok and looking at TikTok videos. I get a lot of information from TikTok, but I always take it with a grain of salt. It's almost like looking through when something's going on out in front of your house, and you look through the peephole and you just catch a glimpse of an event.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, I need to investigate. There's a car on fire. There's a crazy person and doing this, whatever. So you need to investigate. And so that's what TikTok has done, is it's created information is, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. You could, if you tee it up just a certain specific way, it could be something that you agree with, or tee up the thing different way and you disagree. And so if you read The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, once you start understanding the players and the goals, There are a lot of players. It's a 4D. You were talking about chess.
Mhm.
This is a 4D chess game.
Yeah.
And, which to me, when I look at your chessboard, and of course we played chess once already.
Yep.
And I learned.
Hopefully you've got some practice in.
I haven't got any practice in, but mathematically I understand how complex it is. But I
Millions of moves.
Yeah, I haven't played enough to really get my head around that. But I do know that the same thing applies information warfare. I've been duped before. There have been many times I've actually walked back personal feelings about things in the past because I talk to somebody, you hear stories, you get information, and wow, I didn't know. So I do encourage people to check out that book because I truly believe we are in a war right now. And if you look at AI, you can emulate a person. So for example, if there's enough video on you, on your podcast, they can generate your face, your voice. They can say whatever they want you to say. Now, I looked at this. Obama was still in office his second term. Google there's a podcast. It was either WNYC or it was The Hidden Brain. Those were two that I was listening to. And they had a demo and they had somebody get on and look like Obama and just spouted off a couple of really interesting, non-political stuff. And you looked at it and there were a couple of times when you could tell it was fake, but there were some times you're like, wow, that's good. And this was in 2015, around 16, right around that time frame. So today with, one thing about computer horsepower and the coders and the technology is they are cranking at leaps and bounds. So I think that the next phase is you're going to see people saying things that they didn't say. They flat out didn't say. And it's going to be hard. The question then is forensically, how do you prove?
I have a answer to that technically. Like in the anecdote you said about me, for example, say someone used my podcast, used AI to generate an image over my mouth so it matches a voice saying whatever, something racist, homophobic, something that would get me in trouble with the general populace.
Go Yankees.
Yeah, that too. Here in Houston, oh my gosh, I'd get attacked. My house would be on fire. So I say something, the only way to protect yourself is to have hard drive evidence of the original episode. So for me, that would be having my episode on my computer saying, no, this is the actual footage right here. It hasn't been touched. You could tell by the history and the properties that you can look up in a computer when you select a file that shows this was the last day it was uploaded, this was the date it was edited, same day, nothing wrong with that. So it's going to require people to now become much more, cognizant of keeping track of everything that they have that could be altered in any way by AI. So any video footage where they had a long drawn out explanation or a long period of them talking or any kind of dialogue in long form needs to be stored, saved, and make sure that they never lose it in a hard drive or in a computer or in a RAM, something like that, where you have all of your footage as its original form locked away somewhere and stored, because that way you can always go back to it and say, hey, this is the original footage. That's BS, to that guy. And they should be arrested for that. Someone who's using AI to frame someone for something they didn't do or didn't commit or put them in a situation where they potentially could face legal action or their life could be altered in a negative way because of some fake BS that some guy made with AI, that person should be prosecuted. They need to go to jail for that shit, because there's no way that should be allowed, because you have to deter that from happening. It's like, I don't know if you heard about this example, but Drake, the artist, the rapper, so he had someone create an AI form of him singing a female artist's song, but it sounded like Drake. It sounded like Drake's voice, and it was pretty good. Like, it sounded like Drake was singing the song. And so obviously he's getting tired of seeing this crap come out. And then his argument is that, what if they use AI to create music with my voice and release it as my music or release it as my album? So he ended up suing, I don't know who he ended up suing, but he's suing some corporation or some software or some person on behalf or underneath this whole thing. Or something like, basically he's attacking the systems, or he's kind of fighting against that whole aspect of AI, using that to impersonate someone else. And I hope it leads to policy where it says, this is going to be a crime that's going to be pursued with legal action. Like, if you do this, we're going to come after your ass. Like, you're not going to just get away with this.
That's a great point. What's interesting is we have a lot of laws on the books today.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I mean, for example,
that back a little bit. No, you can sit back, but just like move it closer to you.
If you take that, if you're doing that for nefarious reasons, and if you apply the political spectrum, because to me, the political world is a little bit different. To me, it's treasonous.
Yeah.
If you were to go on and take a senator or somebody running for Congress, and if you were to do that, to me, that's treason on all levels. Voter fraud, treasonous. There are certain things that should be treasonous. But it seems to me lately, people get away with a lot of stuff that they shouldn't be getting away with. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, not just in the political arena, I mean, look at what's going on the border. You've got a lot of crazy stuff going on there. You've got stuff happening on the West Coast, and stores are walking out with flat screen TV or bottles, whatever they want to do, they're doing it. I was listening to some information over here, and what was it, New York? Yeah, it was New York, on the subway, where Marine, 5 other people, they choked out a guy who was causing problems on the subway.
I didn't hear about that.
The deal was, and I'm paraphrasing because I've only heard the highlight. This guy had been a problematic person. He had been arrested 42 to 44 times for various levels of chicanery. And he was even charged. I think his last crime was trying to abduct a 7-year-old child.
Oh my.
And so when you call the police and you ask them to show up, do their job, and they don't show up and do their job, what are you going to do? If somebody's in your space,
taking matters into my own hands.
You're going to take matters in your own hands.
Absolutely.
And that's what this guy did. Well, he was a Marine, and I don't think he intended, the guy would kill the guy, but I don't think he intended it. I think he just intended to choke him out, try to maintain some level of control. And so now people are raising hell with the new mayor of New York about that situation. This is all part of 5th generation warfare. These are all distractions, because there's one commonality that I allude to, and that's this mathematical equation that I've said. It's called chaos equals wealth and power.
Mm-hmm.
My whole life, I've thought that there were certain events that were happening randomly but not strategic. And it all started, I'll never forget, when Michael Jackson was on trial.
Mm-hmm.
He was accused of being a pedophile. Right after that, when that was happening, it came out that, what's his name, was dogfighting for Philadelphia. Michael Vick. And, I'm an animal lover, and I don't, I thought what he was doing is horrible. I don't think he should be fighting dogs. I grew up in the South. I never have been to a dog fight, but when I was a kid, I remember you would hear about him all the time. And I think for him, this is how he grew up culturally. And he certainly has paid for his crimes, rightfully so. But at the time, what was interesting to me is that we had this pivot off of him onto Michael Vick. And what it did, I thought of 2 things at that moment. It was a distraction from what was going on with Michael Jackson. I jokingly said, well, Michael Jackson should be sending Michael Vick flowers.
Mm.
At the time, I did not understand why that event was important to me. But additionally, you had Ronnie Spector, who was a famous Hollywood producer in the music industry.
Mhm.
And he was on trial. He had put a gun in a woman's mouth and blew her head off that he picked up at a bar. She was an actress that they call a B-rated actress. And she was, I want to say, in her late 30s, early 40s, attractive blonde lady. And he had taken her home to 2 o'clock in the morning. Phil Spector comes out of the house after the limo driver sitting in the car snoozing at 2 o'clock in the morning. Here's a gunshot. Spector comes out with a smoking gun in his hand and he screams out, "I think I killed her." In the meantime, nobody cares about this poor girl who got killed, shot in the mouth. And he actually got a hung jury his first trial. He ended up getting convicted, but because they were so focused on Michael Vick. But I recognize as what a powerful tool of distraction. If you take the right type of message and you drop it into society, and if you notice, about every 6 weeks, we have the next greatest, biggest, and everything is breaking news, and it's tense. And, we live here in Houston, and if we've been through several hurricanes. I've been through a lot through my life. But the way they talk about hurricanes today, it's like we're all going to die.
The way they talk about everything is like, oh my God, we're going to die. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I see it all the time. I mean, I tell my friends this all the time. We have group chats where I have people who are like-minded stuff, and we always, anytime there's a theme or message or new thing that pops up in everyone's social media, recommended, For You page, whatever it is, usually we're sending it to each other and saying, here's the latest distraction. What are they hiding? What's really going, what are they distracting us from with this story here? For example, when they released the QAnon guy who was involved with the January 6th protests at the Capitol, the guy who had that shaman Indian outfit on that was being toured through the Capitol, was not doing any crime, but was arrested on behalf of the protesters as kind of the scapegoat for the media to have, a martyr to say, this is the guy who started everything on January 6th.
You mean the guy that they imprisoned and didn't let him see an attorney?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
So around the same time that Trump was being indicted, I think early this year, right? That was in March or February or January, sometime early this year. Yeah. That was the big news, right? Huge news. But at the same time, they were releasing this guy for wrongfully arresting him in the first place, which should have been major news, because this scapegoat that had been paraded around social media as the ringleader behind the January 6th protests and the reason why everyone there should be called a terrorist and whatever, they released him because he did nothing wrong. He was wrongfully arrested in the first place, did not get a right to an attorney. No one talked about it, no media coverage, nothing, because everyone was talking about Trump indicted, Trump indicted, Trump indicted. At this exact same time, Andrew Tate, who was also wrongfully arrested, wrongfully charged, was being released at the same time. Him and that guy from January 6th got released, I think, within a week span of each other.
And was it Andrew Tate's brother was also in both part of that?
Correct. Yeah. So Andrew and Tristan both got out at the same time, and media didn't cover it because when he did get arrested, they had thrown stories out there to everybody saying, this guy finally gets arrested, this human trafficker, piece of shit, misogynist, whatever. It was mainstream news when he got arrested, and every major news anchor you could think of, every channel you could think of, got behind that board and attacked Tristan and Andrew and basically said, finally, their time has come, they deserve this, whatever. As soon as it comes out that it's been bullshit the whole time and they got released, not a peep. Everyone's like, Trump indicted, Trump indicted, Trump indicted, Trump indicted. All you saw for that whole month, and you never heard a single story about them getting released. I only knew about Tristan and Andrew getting released because of the recommended that I get on my social media and things that are catering to me, because my AI software knows what I like to see and what I like to watch on my Instagram or on my YouTube, whatever the case is. If I didn't, and if I just trusted major news sources for my information, I wouldn't have heard shit about either of those guys being released. I honestly didn't hear anything about the January 6th guy who would wear the headdress. I didn't know he got released until people told me, my friends, my circle, my network told me that, hey, that guy got released. No idea. I
didn't know till you just told me now.
Yep, he got released at the same time, around the same time that the Tate brothers got released.
Wow.
So it is so true that whatever the news is pushing, generally it's not what you should be focusing on. There's something else you need to look for in what's going on in the world. Like, yeah, I could rattle off so many different things, like those underwater pipelines that got destroyed.
Oh my God.
Not a peep about that on the media, because more than likely the Biden administration is responsible for that. They don't want to talk about that. So there's, I think it's Nomad, right? Or the Nomad Nord pipeline. That's what it's called. Nord pipeline. I think it was Nord 1 that got.
They try to blame Putin, but why would he
his own pipeline?
Yeah, why would he do that?
Yeah,
it made no sense. Yeah, it's stuff like that, and that's a great example of you talk about climate change. That is such a, what I call a volatile topic. And what's interesting to me is that you have so many people screaming about climate change. What they don't scream about is they don't scream about the amount of trash we're putting into the ocean. Mm-hmm. They don't scream about that thing getting blown up.
East Palestine, the train that blew up over there, and all those people that got affected by that. What's that called? Fallout from all those chemicals and stuff. No one I know has mentioned that.
Right. Oh, nothing to see here. There were birds dropping from the sky and
fish dying like hundreds of miles away from it. That's insane. Like lakes where fish were just coming up dead from the fallout from that. Crazy.
So they're not asking the right questions. And, you know, if you look at the latest with Tucker Carlson getting bumped off, I watched this with Bill O'Reilly. And at that time, I don't watch the news. I know who Tucker Carlson is. I see a lot of these news guys. I'll see clips off of Twitter or whatever. And looking what's happening to him, and then looking at BlackRock's involvement, it's gotten so apparent. There's so much data available now. If you know where to look and how to put the pieces together, you can see that there's this fifth generation warfare. And the question then becomes, I mean, we can talk about all these events, and the really question is why. And it goes back to my mathematical equation of chaos equals wealth and power. So what does that mean? Today, if you look at what I'm calling a run, there's a run on land, agriculture, energy, water, vehicles, mobility, currency. There are all these resources that there is a major run on these things to get control. If you control all those elements in society, you control the game board, you control the world. And in the meantime, you know, whenever you have something, one of these events, my mom used to call me all the time, and she would tell me something that was happening. I'm like, how do you know that? She goes, because I saw it on C-SPAN. My mom used to watch C-SPAN every day. Have you ever watched C-SPAN?
Heard of it, but I've never watched it.
It's like watching paint dry. It's basically you're watching Congress and they're all talking about their stuff, and it's boring. That's
right. That's where I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen like the little logo on a clip on YouTube or something.
Well, it's a TV channel on cable. You can watch C-SPAN, but it's boring. If you watch it long enough, you're going to get a lot of information. But it's hard to digest because there's so much BS. And what's funny is what you'll do is you'll see a video clip of I'll use Sheila Jackson Lee, for example. She is a congresswoman here in Houston, and I think she's going to be running for mayor. But she oftentimes would go on a very odd hour. There would be nobody there, but the camera would be on her, and she'd go off on her diatribe as if she had all of Congress that she's speaking to. And she used that. She leveraged that. Very smart strategy. And so, but there's a lot of stuff that happens that is explained. And back in the day when I was hearing from my mother, Bush was in office, and she kept telling me, now I worked in banking for 30 plus years. And the Patriot Act after 9/11, it was like a sword that I used, that I physically used as a company because we were doing underwriting. And it was a powerful tool. Now, I was always looking at ways to get business on within those realms, but I really had a great deal of respect because we actually helped track a terrorist. We helped the Secret Service track a terrorist who got arrested in New York city. So that kind of gave you that that patriotic feel. But in the meantime, my mom's over there in my ear, talking in my ear, saying, well, do you see what other rights we're losing? Do you see what other rights we're losing?
Not just terrorists that they're looking at with the Patriot Act. So most often they're not.
Well, if you've seen any really good in-depth conversations with Snowden, Edward Snowden, then you understand what ultimately the tool that was built, how well it works. And there are movies made about it.
Yep. And it's like they throw it right in your face. The movies literally are stating fact, but as almost as fantasy, because it's in a movie. So you don't think it's real. You don't think what they're actually saying in the movie is really what's going on when they're saying, when the movie character is talking about how untrustworthy the CIA is, they're saying it almost as a joke or almost as a gotcha. But in reality, that's exactly the truth. And it's so funny because CIA probably told them to put it in there because then it desensitizes us to this reality that these government corporations are not having our best interests in heart. They're putting it in front of our face. So as we see it more and more in a movie, it affects us less and less when we hear CIA is untrustworthy or FBI is untrustworthy. It doesn't really impact us because we've seen it so much in movies now. We're like, oh, I know that's a movie line. Stop. You're talking like you're in a movie right now. But that's reality.
It's conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I know guys that have worked for, I call them the alphabets. And they've shared with me this is part of their tactics and conditioning. You get it out there. One tactic that I used to see notice how on the crime shows, how they treat criminals. If you talk to any police officer today that is a detective, for example, and they have to interrogate a potential criminal, they all tell me the same thing. You don't have to do all this theatrics. There are certain ways you can have a conversation and extract what you need out of them. And they all laugh at what you see. But what I look at is how they're conditioning society that it's okay to violate your civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that was really bizarre. For some reason, it would stick out to me. But when I started talking to guys in law enforcement, we don't ever do that. We don't have to do that.
Doesn't even work most of the time.
Doesn't even work.
You got to connect with them and make it almost as a friendship thing to get any information out of a criminal. You can't combat them and say that, or like put up a stance that I'm against you. Generally, detectives, and I've watched many interrogations, real interrogations. They have them all over YouTube with like some notorious criminals and some just, petty thefts, whatever. Always they're trying to generate a relationship. They're leaning on them. They're coming very close to them. They're calling them my friend. They're saying, I'm trying to help you out here. I want to make sure that you get the best end of the stick. And just so they can get that confession. As soon as they get the confession, wipe their hands clean, move on. So yeah, the movies generate this image of a lot of stuff that's not real, but then they also generate stuff that is real, but they make it satire. So it doesn't draw a reaction out of us like an angry or what's the word? I guess something that would stir up in us to actually try and affect change with these organizations or with things that we see in movies.
Yeah. Anyway, I've always found that very fascinating, and I like the interviews where you're like, really, that's stupid. There's plenty of those on YouTube.
Yeah. Talking about the criminals, right?
The criminals. You're like, oh my God, are they really that stupid?
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, they've used those same techniques to get false confessions. A lot of evidence. Back in, I did the research, up to 2014, the state of New York had paid $96 million in reparations for wrongful convictions. New York State and Texas had the highest rate of wrongful convictions that they had gathered through the Innocence Foundation, which is Jason Flom is a supporter of that, and he has a podcast called Wrongfully Convicted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very fascinated with those numbers, and I'm really fascinated with that whole process of investigation. I listen to a lot of crime podcasts, and number one, I've learned, it's always the spouse that did it. Don't take your phone with you. Don't tell anybody if you've ever committed. I mean, there are like 4 or 5 different rules that you need to follow because every single time it's one of those things that gets them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend of mine go through a really horrible experience here in Texas. It was an early manufacturer of CBD products.
Mm.
And he got raided by DEA, and they raided his house twice. They legally tested, or they illegally concluded that he had THC product. They have this vial that they pour this stuff in, and they hold up to the light, and if it turns blue, and he's sitting there looking through it, and the DEA guy's going, "That's blue," and he goes, "No, it's not." Mm-hmm. Nobody could see blue but him. But in essence, they treated him horribly, him and his wife. And they confiscated everything out of their house, their safe, their cash, all their electronics, all their guns, anything of any value, all his product, because he had, pallets of bottles of CBD that he had produced. But what he told me was, what I learned, him quoting him, he says, "I learned the cops can lie to you, but you can't lie to them." Mm. Oh, well, that's interesting. And so that's why when you go into, of course, you could be talking to a police officer and you don't even know you're being investigated.
Yeah.
They don't have to tell you that. Now, I'm not knocking to them for their strategy. But I tell people all the time, I don't care how long they keep you in there. Don't, just say lawyer and don't say anything else. I had a family member who's, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, husband passed away. He was old. And the first thing they did was they put her in the police car. And they just separated her, they investigated, and they never had a conversation with her. But they put her in the police car and made sure she was being taken care of, that she had water and she had something to drink, and that there was somebody there to counsel her. But they isolated her so they could go and make sure that everything was kosher.
The stories added up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that made sense. But what they didn't do was they didn't put her in the box and, do all that. But yes, for some people, they do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like I see a lot of these interactions on YouTube now. They come across my recommended a lot. I don't know. I think I may have watched a couple, so then now they're flooding it onto my recommended. But it's interactions between police and civilians when they get pulled over. And a lot of times, I mean, I would think, and it makes sense, that the only ones that get posted are the ones that make the cops look bad. So generally, most of them make the cops look bad. And these cops, a lot of them just pull stuff out of their ass to try and push their prerogative to make this person that they pulled over look like they're in the wrong. Whether the officer was wrong or not, the officer cannot admit I was wrong. They rarely admit I was wrong. And even when they get just proved wrong, exposed to their face by the person, whether the person's because the person's a lawyer, so he knows the law back and forth, the officer still won't say I'm wrong. They just clam up and just stop talking and let the guy record them and make them look like a fool. But I've yet to see any. Maybe I've seen a couple where the officer actually admits they're wrong, but more than most, the officer just will push and push and push to make sure that he doesn't look wrong, even if he wrongfully pulled over someone or he's trying to find a way to make a charge. A lot of these officers will just try to find something that sticks, so they'll ask a lot of questions in the interaction to try and get the person to slip up and say something that incriminates them for a crime, so they can give them a ticket for something if they know they're wrong. And I'm not saying that's widespread. This right here, this kind of conversation is why you see a lot of people then expand it and say all police are bad, or this is why police are wrong. It's a lot of bad actors that make up these videos, make up these encounters, but I would think generally this isn't the majority. It's because this goes back to what we talked about, what the media chooses to distract us with. It's all negativity. It's always negativity. So when you see a video like this about cops pulling over civilians, it's going to be negative, and it's going to paint the cops in a negative light. But with that being said, it should be addressed. And I think what's true about situations like that is these cops don't get reprimanded. I think that they get exposed and look like fools on the internet, but I think that's as far as it goes. I rarely see police stations and departments actually punish or reprimand these cops for these behaviors. I mean, that's why you see a lot of cops who, in some cases, do wrongfully murder someone, but all they get is a suspension, or they don't even get terminated from their police force, or they get terminated from that department, but they can go join another department in another state or another city. So that part is true. I think that's true. I think I see a lot of cops getting away with behaviors where they should be reprimanded or should be at least corrected and taught, you shouldn't be doing that. This is the proper way to handle it. You were wrong there. I don't see that, though.
It's really interesting you say that. It's something that I've always been curious about. Less than 3% of police officers fire their weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about this for a minute. You're hiring somebody to serve, to carry a weapon, to have the license to use all means necessary, all the way up to deadly.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big burden for people. Now, there is you go to 2020 on YouTube, the show 2020. There is about a 6.5-minute video, and it's called Close Quarter. It's a close quarter train.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a really interesting illustration. And what they did was they take this woman she looks like she's 20, but I think she's in her early 30s. She spent so many years in Coast Guard, and then she became a peace officer. And one of the things that our founder, Craig Sawyer of Veterans for Child Rescue, he does training, very similar training, but he does it under high stress.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you go to the range and you're shooting and you're practicing, you're taking it easy, but you're never in a situation where you've got any blood in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what does that mean? We don't do this training it's available at the FBI level, but not every FBI agent. And what they do is they take this helmet and they put this on this woman. It's got cameras in it. It's got all these devices to read her biometrics, and it's got a veil over it. They take her into the room and they say, your partner is going to be with you. We're going to take you to this room and we're going to introduce you to somebody. He's going to be really close to you. He's either friend or foe. Okay. So you walk into the room, your vision is completely pitch black. They pop it up, and then this guy immediately just pops her, like a lineman, boom, just hits her. And the whole idea is to get her adrenaline up, to startle her. And he pulls out a knife. It's a fake knife. He pulls out a knife. She draws her weapon and she's screaming out orders. And she sees her part. She's kind of looking for her partner, and she's telling him, put down the gun, put down the gun. Well, he's got a knife. And he throws the knife down and she ends up shooting him. Not real life, but it's in the simulation. This process was so real to her. After they were done with it, they took her into the other room, and her adrenaline was cranking. She was almost in tears because it was a real experience for her. But what she learned was what's going on physiologically. When you go into fight or flight mode, all of the blood goes to the core of your body. Your heart and lungs are demanding blood.
Yeah. So
there's nothing going on up here. Now, her brain told her the guy had a gun. He did not have a knife. Now, they went back and they reviewed the event, all the video, and she was like, oh my God, I thought he had a gun.
Wow. And
I was concerned about mine and my partner's safety. Now, what I learned from that, and this is something that I've listened to the Spec Ops community guys, that this is the type of training. When they do training, these are the things that they learn to manage, because if you've never been through that, once you go through an event, if you've never been through it and then you have your event, you can't tell the story the way it really happened because you don't have anything going on up here. We've heard of people that have been shot that shouldn't have been shot.
Yeah.
There have been guys. I remember there was a guy in Georgia, I think. He turned around and he had a gun, but he turned around and ran. He got shot in the back. Well, it's because the information, once it was calculated in the brain, that he was facing the police officer and there was a threat. And then he sent information to his finger. And they also say, well, why is it that they always shoot him so many times? Well, when you tell your finger to pull, it's on its own. They call it, that's what muscle memory is. Mm-hmm. You're emptying your magazine, okay, until you've got nothing left. That's muscle memory.
Yeah, only a trained killer would two shots and then stop.
And that's why you go through high stress training. Well, we don't do this for our police. So I love what you're saying about that. And I think about those type of things. You probably sit there and think, well, why do they do that? And why do they do this? I'm analytical like that. And when I was talking to Craig one day, he said, hey, I'm going to send you this video. You've got to watch this video because this is going to really help you get your head around this. And so along with another podcast I listened to, it was they ran this model where they were trying to figure something out about your psychological profile. And they somehow figured out that they could determine if a person had a certain type of cancer, even though they didn't even know they have cancer. And they were like, oh my God, how do we figure this out? These were brainiacs at MIT or one of those schools. And I thought to myself, if you could figure out some sort of psychological profile that somebody has cancer, then you could probably figure out if there are some people that are not meant to be peace officers. Okay? Because it takes a special kind of person. You need to be a beast, but you need to be able to control. You can be a Marine, you can be bust down doors, but there are a certain amount of discipline you have to be a peace officer.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, why don't we do that? Why don't we get the brainiacs in Silicon Valley or wherever, come with the psych profile, you can run it through future candidates, and they say, you know what? You would be a great Marine, but you wouldn't be or great Army recon. You'd be great in combat, but you're really not built for that disciplined. I need to manage chaos. I need to not shoot somebody unless I have to, absolutely have to.
That's what makes those special forces guys so amazing. I mean, they have to be faced with so much adversity in a lot of situations because you don't get to that top level unless they're expecting you to go out and actually use these skills that they train you for. And I'm talking about like the Rangers, Green Berets, people of
Delta
this caliber, correct? Navy SEALs, stuff like that. They are, when you meet people like that, they are so composed and stoic. And I'm sure they have a lot of trauma too from a lot of their experiences. But because of the way they've been trained in most situations, I'm sure there's breaking points for all of them. But it's so far that I don't think you'd ever see that in person. But these guys have trained their mind so well that any situation, they're so stoic and calm. The funny thing is, though, sometimes it'll be the smallest things where they will say, like, I don't know what to do in these situations. Like whether it's something to do with their wife or something to do with their kids. It's like these things, they'll be like, oh, like, man, it drives me around in circles. But a high stress situation where there's guns involved or something like that, no problem. They turn that switch on and they'll be stoic and calm the whole time. It's so funny, and it's crazy.
It's funny to say that because about 90%, Craig Sawyer, our founder, he was a Marine, then he was a Navy SEAL, a DevGru sniper. Ran 60 countries chasing terrorists. He was a federal investigator, marshal. I mean, he's done it all. And sometimes I'll see him get upset about something. Looking, I'm like, people shoot at you all the time. And he goes, that's what bothers you? He goes, I know. He goes, most things don't bother him. It's every now and there's some little thing, and those things don't bother me. But half the time I'm like, people used to shoot at you, try to kill you.
Yeah.
That gets under your skin. He goes, I know. A lot of times it happens. It's what I call stupid people. When stupid people do really stupid things.
Oh, that'll piss everyone off.
Yeah.
But yeah, that skill's amazing. That's really my biggest goal, is to master composure in all situations. Because if you can remain calm, whether that's in interactions, at the workplace, in public, whatever it is, composure to me is the biggest skill you can have because it'll bleed into all other aspects of your life. And the people I've seen that are just, when I think of a calm person, the people that come to my head, those are the people I want to emulate. I'm like, wow, they're just so composed and stoic, and they know what to say and how far to elaborate on certain topics. Because they're so composed and stoic, a lot of people want to win conversations in just regular talk and stuff like that. The people that I know, and when I think of calm people, they don't have that kind of crutch on their shoulder when they're in a conversation, so they know exactly how far to elaborate on certain things and stuff like that. It's so beautiful to me to see people who have that skill mastered, where they're calm, composed, never striving for a win in a conversation or a win in any situation. It's just, this is my element. I know how far to stretch it. I know how to tighten it up. And I just want to really learn that skill. So something beautiful to see.
That's I like that. Have you noticed, with that being said, have you noticed with how we communicate today? I have young adult children, and I've noticed something here in the last few years in that type of scenario where I really needed the patience that you're mentioning that I didn't have.
Yeah.
So I truly understand your journey, and I too hope that one day I could have that Zen ability. But what I notice about the communication is, like, for example, if I am talking to the teenagers, or I'm talking to my kids, and I'm disciplining them or whatever, they're basically, what they're doing is they're not listening, they're reloading. And all of a sudden it's a salvo, it's full salvo. And it's almost like, well, I just gave you a whole bunch of information on the last topic.
Yep.
You didn't respond to any of it. And now we're on the next one. And so then you try to respond to that. And again, they're reloading.
It's so funny. That's the perfect way to describe it. I'm guilty of that too. Like when you said it, I pictured exactly what you said, because I've been in conversations where usually it's a debate about a topic that I'm passionate about, where I know my stuff and I'm so fixated on what I know about the topic that when they're talking, I'm just like, oh, I'm going to follow up with what I just said with, and I'll look for any moment to interject and just throw out what I know. But reloading is a perfect way to describe it. Yeah, I've noticed that all the time, and I'm guilty of it too.
I think we've been conditioned like that. If you watch the news reporters, first of all, a news reporter, especially at a White House press conference, they can't ask a simple question. They'll ask these long questions, and then the person doesn't answer the question, and then they're asking it different. They're always interrupting halfway through. You see it on people like Piers Morgan.
Oh my
God. Some of those shows,
that guy.
Even Bill O'Reilly used to do. And Bill O'Reilly, I started to say earlier that Bill O'Reilly, they did to Tucker Carlson what they did to Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly was the number one show, then they booted him off. Now they booted off Tucker Carlson. Kind of wonder what's going on there. What was their strategy? Because he was the number one. Now their ratings are tanked. But a lot of these people, the way they communicate, is teaching us how to communicate. Now, I am fascinated with communication because, in the corporate world, in the banking world, we would be sitting in, it's like once or twice a year, you'd be in a senior meeting, and the president would always say, well, what could we do to make this place better?
Yeah.
And it's a valid question. And there was always that person that you hated because they didn't have anything to contribute to the conversation. And they would say, we need better communication. And everybody's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because we're thinking about the bazillion emails and notices and memos that were going out at the time that nobody ever reads. That's always stuck with me. And that's how I came to that conclusion, because what I'm learning today is if I have something to say to you, it's been bouncing around this cranium of mine for a long period of time, especially if it's a volatile subject, if it's a political subject, a spiritual subject. I've had a lot of time. And in my brain, it makes sense. Have you ever had somebody tell you something and it's like, that makes no sense, but in their brain, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now you add in the last 10 or 20 years, you add the layer of now, whatever you say, I'm going to apply my filter to it. I'll give you a great example. If I walked up to a female that I know and I've complimented on something she's wearing, I say, hey, that's a nice blouse. Her response could be, what are you staring at my chest? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I like the blouse. We've gotten to this point where I cannot deliver information to you in the manner in which I want you to understand it. The person you're speaking with is applying their filter.
There's a lot of variables too, though. There's for that example, right? Say that example. If the girl's attracted to you, the response will be completely different. She'll be, give you a smile. She'll say thank you, probably ask you something in the follow-up. She's not attracted to you, that's when you get that reaction. So the perception of the person you're talking to plays a big part in that filter. How is it going to be a positive intake or a negative intake? It could be something completely stupid that person says, but if you're infatuated with that person, it's going to come across as, the right thing. Like whatever they said was fantastic. That's another reason. This kind of stretches further to the power celebrities and influencers have over our kids and over people who look up to them. If you have a role model, to me, that's one of the worst things you can do, is having a role model, because no matter what they say, because people are changed, no one is perfect. So anyone can say great things, but also say bad things in the next breath. So looking up to someone and having a role model, to me, is dangerous, because you're always going to take what they say as truth or back it 100%. Doesn't matter what they say. You're going to always take it in as something positive or the right thing. You won't question it because you're idolizing that person and looking up to them in such a high standard. But that's a big variable when it comes to communication. How's that person perceiving you? Like, I perceive you as a knowledgeable person, so I take your information that you share a lot more positively because I look at you as a knowledgeable person on X, Y, and Z topics. So I'm going to automatically trust what you say more than I might trust a random stranger on these same topics, because I'm like, how do you know this stuff? How do I know you know what you're talking about? You know this subject matter because this is where you do your work. I would automatically and unconsciously trust you more than if Michael told me about the same thing, right? So that's a big variable too in communication that I've noticed, is how does this person perceive me? Because that could change how they take what I say.
Certainly. Now you've given me something to think about. I haven't really put a lot of thought into that. I've thought about it in the sense that I'm your dad. I'm having this debate with my kids. Beyond that, probably not as much. So it's certainly, there's a lot of validity to what you're saying. But what I do find, what's interesting is that along with what you're saying, if I'm a subject matter expert and speaking facts, then I'm more believable than a non-subject matter expert speaking the exact
same facts.
And it's gotten so bad now that we're talking about math being racist. 2 + 2 does not equal 4.
Oh man, I can't believe you mentioned that. I had mentioned that on the podcast to someone else at a different episode. We had brought that up, the math being racist thing. I saw that interview. I was dumbfounded. I wanted to throw my phone out the window and just cut myself off from the world. I was like, I can't believe this is getting airtime right now on my phone. Crazy stuff.
Well, you can argue that point all you want, but if I get pulled over with a police officer going 75 in a 40, I'm not going to convince him that it was really 40 in a 40. And that argument will never win. If I go to the bank and if I'm short on my mortgage, I'm not going to convince them that I really paid the full bill amount for that month. That's not going to work. So you can make these claims all you want all day long, but you apply them practically. If you said, okay, I'm going to build a deck, I'm going to cut this thing to be this long, and if it doesn't fit, that's my whole problem with this destruction of logic. We're destroying the logic chip of America, and we're doing it now with our kids. Okay, the biggest destructor of that is the phone.
Yeah.
What is phone and technology? What it's doing is it's making us dopamine driven. So what does that mean? It means that every time you have a victory of some sort, it could be I got so many likes, I got some respond to my text, I got thumbs up emoji, I won a video game, whatever that is, I'm getting an injection of dopamine. And then like any drug, and it is a drug that your body produces, you build up a tolerance. So you want more dopamine. It's the pleasure center of yourself. What that's doing is it's not allowing the frontal cortex of your brain to develop. This is our logic chip. So if I lick my finger and stuck it in that electrical outlet, it's going to hurt. But we're witnessing people that will continue to make the same mistakes and expect different results, which is not going to happen. So when I was a younger person, I had fear for the police. I had fear for my teachers. I had fear for my elders, my neighbors' parents. I feared them because they knew that they would either tell my parents. Now, if it was a football coach, he'd whack me upside the head. My parents wouldn't. So I had this level of fear. But what happens when you start messing with a dopamine-driven mind and you're not developing your frontal cortex, you're also removing your logical thinking. You're removing patience. and you're removing forgiveness. So I get a lot of, in my social media feeds, these people that go to Starbucks and their coffee's too hot or it's the wrong order, and they just pitch a fit over a $5 cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Or they're on a plane and they're acting a fool, and there's a cop standing over them. You have to deboard the plane. If you don't, we're going to deboard the plane. I'm going to arrest you. And it's 5 minutes of arguing with this cop. I've seen people argue with cops that says, if you don't get out of the car, I'm going to tase you. They still do this. They're logic chip. Okay. Have you ever been tased? I haven't been tased. I actually have been electrocuted on at the electroshock therapy in Tough Mudder. It is not fun. It is not fun. I do not like electricity. I don't recommend it. But that's logical to me. It's no different than you stuck your hand in the fire one time when you were a kid. You don't do it anymore. You try to avoid it. There are certain things that we learn logically. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about these things on social, I'm very fascinated with them. But I always have asked, why are we doing this? Why are people in society not getting it? And it's because we become dopamine driven and we're removing the logical thought process, evolution of logic. We don't develop our frontal cortex until we're about 20. I say 28. I think that number is moving. There have been collegiate studies that have figured this out.
I was 25. I've heard that for most of my life. It develops at 20, fully developed at 25.
I would agree to some degree, but I don't know. I see
unless, like you said, the impacts of negative influences to your prefrontal cortex delay the development of it. Like if there is an effect on too much dopamine where it slows the growth, then I could see your argument that it maybe pushes the fully developed date further out, or it just never fully develops. Like that could be something that happens too. I mean, you see people in their 40s and 50s acting crazy too. So, you see people in their 60s acting crazy where I'm just questioning their behavior. You've been on this earth for 60 years and you're acting like this and saying that kind of stuff. That's a little alarming, but I completely agree with what you're saying. I think logic and truth always should have a handshake. I think that there should always be a relationship, and a firm one, between logic and truth. But objective truth does not hold the same weight anymore as it did probably centuries past and decades past in our history. Now, objective truth does not matter as much as subjective reality to people. They value their subjective reality more than they value objective truth. So when you take away the power and the significance of truth and objectivity, the further you go down the generations and the more you do it and the more it becomes widespread, where you're saying, no, your subjective reality is more valuable than the truth holds no weight anymore. The truth, even though it is the truth, does not have any significance in the minds and the hearts of the people. All that matters to them is their subjective reality. And that's where you get to the point where we're at now, where people they're not going to value objectivity anymore. Now it's just, how do I feel and what's real to me, not what's real. Because there's no such thing as what's real to you. There's just reality, delusion. But people don't think like that no more.
I think what you're talking about too is leading us down a path of, because, for example, what you're basically doing is you're saying the rules of society don't apply to me. Mm-hmm. Therefore, there's a railroad crossing, the arm goes down. That doesn't apply to me. I think I'm going to cross it. Bam, you get hit by whatever. There is what we call the Darwin Awards. I think the candidates for the Darwin Award are going up significantly in the past 5 years because there's more stupid people doing stupid things.
Yeah.
And you and I look at this and we laugh and we think it's interesting, but I'm always wondering, how did that person not realize that what they, doing that act, like, you remember it was about 10 years ago when it was a big deal. They called it car surfing. So you'd be driving down the road and you'd jump out onto the hood of your car and surf while nobody was driving it. So at the time, it may not have been 10 years, it may have been less, but I saw this guy in a short bed Chevy Silverado, like a 1980, beautiful truck, hops out, and eventually it veered off and hit a tree, going about 15 miles an hour. And I'm like, what about these guys that have these $40,000 wakeboard boats and they can wakeboard behind him without a rope. So they hop on the back and there's nobody driving the boat. And then they fall down and then their boat goes off into the yonder. Who thinks that is a good idea?
That, I think, is its own stratosphere of ridiculousness, because that's just idiocy at its finest. I mean, That I think is just one. There's two things there. One, they're just literally genuinely crazy and they have a death wish, or they are insane, or two, they want attention. I mean, people don't do outlandish acts like that unless they're trying to garner some sort of attention. So most of them probably recorded it or had someone recording so they could share it with the world and get attention, or share it with someone that they wanted to see them do this act. People don't do crazy things generally unless they're crazy or they want attention. That's really the only two avenues that would cause someone to do something crazy like that. I mean, that is just ridiculous. There's so much risk involved with that. And what's the reward? The reward is you might go viral for 15 minutes. Like, you get your 15 minutes of fame, and potentially you could have millions of dollars of damage done to people's boats, people's property. So attention or crazy. That's the only two things I see there.
Don't you find that, though, there's more prevalency of that behavior?
Oh, yeah. Attention seeking is at an all-time high right now. I mean, everyone wants attention. Everyone wants validation. That's what I see. I think a lot of this behavior, and virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is just another form of, I want validation for my ideologies, thoughts, and what I just supported. So everyone wants attention. I mean, I'm guilty of it to an extent in certain areas of my life, not all areas, and not most areas. I think I've learned how to live without attention and live without validation for the most part. Everyone flips up and has those cravings here and there. But yeah, everyone wants attention, man. That's really what it is. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want their voice to matter. So it's kind of led us to where we're at right now. A lot of the behaviors we see are people just trying to get attention or validation from someone. Usually it's someone specific, but now more often than not, you also see people just generally trying to get general attention from just the public eye. That's why YouTube comments are so popular now. That's why Instagram comments are so popular. You see thousands and tens of thousands of likes on comments underneath a video because someone wanted to post that so they could, make the general populace either laugh or angry or whatever it is. They want to feel heard, so they do ridiculous behavior.
So in the meantime, while all this is happening, we're witnessing all this craziness. There's something that we, Veterans for Child Rescue, that we focus on. Mm-hmm. That's not getting the attention that's the trafficking of kids.
Yeah.
And 2016-ish, Craig Sawyer was spending an evening conversation with an intelligence officer who shared with him that Harris County, Montgomery County was a hotbed for trafficking of kids. He just looked at him like crazy. And he started looking into it, and he realized, he says, look, I've been chasing terrorists over 60 countries. Okay, I've been doing this for like 18 years, and 14 in the military and like 4 in federal program. And yet you have a level of terrorism. I mean, violating, raping kids is a lifelong burden for people that go through that. And so we went out to do that. So whenever I talk about chaos equals wealth and power, and there's a run on the resources in society, they've been called everything from the cabal to New World Order. There's all these different terms. There are actors that have been identified in that. But I look at the currency of all of this as being trafficking of kids. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I feel this way is in that space where you're in the Air Marshal program, or if you're in the Hollywood program. I've heard this from different people in different versions, but it basically goes, I'm going to a party tonight. I got to be careful because there's hookers and blow. Mm-hmm. And I've heard this different versions of that said by different people. Finally, I asked. I mean, I thought I knew what it meant, but when they explained to me, I was like, wow, that's a different layer. So what that basically means is you go to bed with hookers and blow, you wake up with kids and cameras. Mm. So I started thinking about this from a problematic perspective, and I came up with the trafficking of kids as the currency that runs the world. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at Peter Nygaard and Jeffrey Epstein, they're two different actors. They both have islands. One of them was from Canada. One of them was from America. More people know about Epstein than they do about Nygaard. But Nygaard was a very influential player in the world. And so I came up with this belief that there's 4 different positions as a policymaker as it pertains to the currency. And that is, you're either ignoring it, you are benefiting from it, you are participating in it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do I bring this up? I voted for Reagan my first time, as I mentioned earlier. But every election cycle, and you're probably starting to go through this being a young man, you kind of try to figure out who you're going to vote for. And there's always that new person that you're really excited about every election cycle. And you vote for them and they said X, Y, and Z. And then a year or two into their term, they do something that makes no sense. So you try to justify it because you don't want to admit, we're really bad about admitting we made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But you go on to the next election cycle. And so I think in the last 5 or 6 years, it's come out that with Epstein, that there was a lot of leverage going on. And so now some of these things are starting to make sense. Now, if you look at, there are 2 different representatives that I watched their careers. It was Tulsi Gabbard and Allen West. Allen West is now in Texas. He ran for governor. He didn't make it past the primaries, but he actually was a representative in Florida one term. Tulsi Gabbard did hers in Hawaii. One was Republican, one was Democrat. And I believe, just from comments that I've listened, I'm surmising, so that they went into the program, they went through some sort of a orientation. And they were told, okay, this is your mentor. Here are the committees you're going to be on. Here's the meetings we're going to have. Here's how you're going to vote. And they all was like, I remember Allen West saying, wait. I'm going to vote for the people I'm representing. And that's why he lasted one term. He's a patriot, believes in what's right for his people in this country. And so I have a great deal of respect for him. Same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. I think I have a great deal of respect for her because she's trying to do what's right. Now, there are some issues that we don't see, we probably wouldn't see eye to eye. But I'm happy. I feel like she and I could have a sit-down conversation and talk about those like adults and have a great conversation. Probably both would learn from each other, maybe some perspective. But I kept wondering, there are patriots that have done this, that have pivoted. Like, how do you do that? And it dawned on me after many conversations I've had, and the conversations I've had with Craig, is that the leverage is a very big one. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they're benefiting and there's leverage. It's not just they're in one position of the currency. They could be more than one position. And so that's the only conclusion that I can come up with. Now, I don't have any analytical data that I can prove this, where I could give you examples and guarantees. This is more of a hypothetical theory, but I feel very strong about it because it's something I've thought about for most of my adult life, and it's the only thing that makes sense until somebody gives me something that's more believable.
I would say it's common sense that's going on, a lot of it. Not just politics too. In any industry, there's leverage. People get blackmailed all the time. They're small or big, and this is a huge one. And definitely, I think anyone with a brain knows that this is going on. I'm pretty sure not all of these people are going into these positions of power thinking, okay, I'm going to have sex with minors or have sex with kids. They get planted or something happens where a picture's taken where it looks like they're in a sticky situation. But that's all that takes for them to be in a position of fear now, where like, okay, I have to do what this person says or my life is over, even if they didn't do anything wrong. But the evidence and the picture that was taken with them could prove that. So yeah, I think it's common sense that people should figure that out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm going to throw something out here locally that I thought was really interesting. And again, I have no proof, but how is it that we had the number 1 quarterback on the Texans and we had the number 1 wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins, and they decided to trade Hopkins over him not getting along with his coach. And then their quarterback, I mean, you lose your best player, your best receiver, you're pissed off. And next thing you know, he's saying, I don't want to play for the Texans anymore. And then all of a sudden, he is under a scandal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying he didn't do what he did, but I got to think that the Texans had to know what was going on for some time. And did they rectify the situation before it got happened? No, I think they used it as leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing just, it's like really, the way it unfolded was illogical to me. I applied what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I use that same mentality because you basically ruined the best offensive threat in the NFL.
Yeah.
Over what? So I tend to agree. It's not just in politics. It's wherever it can happen. It's happening more and more. But yet because we're screwing with the logic chip, nobody thinks about these.
Mm-hmm.
And more, I think now people are starting to start thinking about these. And the reason being is I quit watching the news.
Yeah.
I don't watch the news at all. Having conversations and listening to podcasts and watching stuff on Rumble, on YouTube, on the various platforms gives me more information.
Yeah.
It gives me more information to digest. I don't necessarily, like when you and I have these conversations, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, he's bringing up some very interesting points I haven't thought about. They're thought-provoking. They're logical tests. It's logical.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It goes back to the most simple test. If you put your hand in a fire, it's going to burn. So when you apply that logical thought process that you're using the front of your brain, I get that, but I don't get that from watching the news.
Mm-hmm.
What I get is the end of the world. It's the storm of the century. It's the everything is it's breaking news.
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting. What's the next? I'm going to make a prediction. I want you to think about this because this is. I used to make some of these bold predictions, and some of them are really bad. But this one, the government has recently said, "Hey, we believe that there are aliens out there.
Mm-hmm.
That there's life outside of our planet." I'm waiting for them. I'm waiting for them to say, "Hey, there are aliens walking among us." I'm waiting for that. A crash happened and they get it on video. I'm waiting for some sort of event as a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. You haven't revealed this up until this point. All of a sudden, why now? Because it's a distraction. They are running out of topics.
Yeah.
I mean, what is there left to utilize? Because all the craziness in the last 5 years, they're running out of ideas. So my prediction is the next 5 years, there's going to be an alien crash. There's going to be some sort of reveal. There are aliens among us. It's good.
Yeah. What's alarming to me though is that what topics are they distracting us from is just vile that they're distracting us from these topics. For example, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which should have been front page news, which every American should have been tuned into this trial to watch, and it should have been on every major news network because she was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, she was his basically helping to traffic these children. Didn't get any coverage. They were distracting us with news about Trump or news about Biden, whatever it was at the time. Why would they have it in their hearts to distract the public from a matter with such significance as human trafficking of children and the people involved and what she was willing to say and share in trial about this case and about the players involved? How could they be so dark to distract the people from a matter as that? Like how could you come to that low point and just be so evil that as a news network or as a player who's running behind the scenes that we don't want people to pay attention to this, which is evil to me. That's what's alarming to me is the topics they choose to distract us from. The Tate release, the guy from January 6th release, okay, sure, they're furthering their agenda. That's not good either, but it's not as bad as distracting us from an Epstein trial or a Maxwell trial and stuff like that.
That's a really good point, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's important. I'll ask you this question. When you think of intrinsic value, so the intrinsic value of an iPhone, $1,200, right? intrinsic value basically means what somebody's willing to pay for it. We know what an ounce of gold costs. We know what rent on an apartment, price of a home. What do you think the intrinsic value, all of the data made? I think it is the most valuable set of data just about on this because there's so much leverage. That's why I think we're not, I call it the nothing to see here tour. Government has become there's nothing to see here, folks. Everything, there was a wreck of a train in oh no, there's nothing to see. It was just no big deal.
Yeah.
Oh, there's, there was a guy that tried to shoot up a school and they took him down before he killed anybody. Oh, there's nothing to see. But when you refer to Ghislaine Maxwell, that's the largest treasure trove of intel. And I think if we did get to look behind, the curtain, we would all, well, I think partially there would be some people on there that it would break our hearts. There's probably some people on there you're like, oh, wow, I really like that person.
He was involved or she was involved.
Yeah. So
that's the biggest frustration for me, really, just how much they get away with. The people in power, these players behind the scenes. I mean, that should have been an easy wipe our hands clean, throw everything out into the light, and get these people exposed. It should have been so easy, so simple. It was basically gifted to them. They had the guy, the main perpetrator, the ringleader who was pulling in all these politicians, all these celebrities into this world of human trafficking and child abuse and child trafficking. They had him on a silver platter. You could just tell by looking at the guy, he was a pussy. He would break under any kind of interrogation. Like, throw his ass to the fire and he will tell all. You could just tell by looking at the guy, he was a little snake. They had a silver platter to just expose everybody. And we didn't even get that. Like, it's just so frustrating at how much these fuckers get away with when it comes to stuff like this.
I will tell you this. You're absolutely right. And what it really tells you is how small, and I'm just going to how small I am in the game. I'm not even a pawn on the board. So it really shows the level of power. I mean, the guy was, they took him out allegedly. They claimed that he killed himself. Circumstances were absolutely ridiculous. Okay, they're absolutely ridiculous. It's gotten to the point, because there's so many people with cameras and phones around. It's hard for them to get away with their chicanery because there's always somebody looking. There's always a piece of evidence that will bite them in the butt. It used to be you can whack people. If you go back to in history, there have been people that have died mysteriously in one car accidents or heart attacks or whatever. And you think,
anyone related to Hillary Clinton, for example?
I think they should open up their own funeral home. I mean, I do not know the Clintons.
Yeah, straight up. If you're watching, I don't know anything about you guys. Leave me alone. I'm good.
But they sure are. If you look at the number of, in your lifetime, the number of funerals you've been to, their numbers measured exponentially compared to the average person. So, but yeah, it's just amazing to me. And I'll tell you what is amazing to me too, is our system is so complicated. You'll see people standing in front of Congress testifying. And they are lying through their teeth. And it's like, well, what is Congress going to do about this? I mean, the guy's lying to you. What can you do about it? Now, when we were kids, we were younger on the playground, when somebody did that, you punch them in the face. And that usually solved the whole lying thing.
Yeah.
Or doing stupid stuff. Going back to when you're young, you start developing that logical thinking, because if you say something, somebody pops you in the mouth, you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yep.
Okay.
That's how you train a dog. It's how I trained him over there. Like he's a great dog because I popped him when I needed to, and I rewarded him when I needed to. He learned from, positive and negative reinforcement.
Exactly. So, it's I think for us here today and people that the circles that we live in, every single day we keep thinking it can't get any crazier because we're logical people. And I don't know. You look at our president. How is this guy not being investigated? How many girls' hairs has he? He is creepy Joe, man.
Yeah.
The guy is a creeper, but yet the people that I know that are that support him, they don't see it.
And how can a man who can't even formulate a coherent sentence be the ruler of a country? Not ruler, but the head and the mantelpiece for an entire country, especially one of the world's superpowers. The man can't even. I use this actually in one of my. So I do this fitness thing now. I kind of have a fitness gram, like where I'm starting to post some workouts and stuff like that. And I saw this trend that I jumped on board with. It's basically the audio says, "I was about to quit my workout, but then I remembered Joe Biden once famously said," and then it's him stumbling through a sentence, but it's like a pretend motivational thing. It is so funny. So I used that on one of my videos, and it just had me laughing so hard. But it shouldn't even be funny because this is the reality. That was him actually in one take on camera at a press conference, not saying a single damn thing in a minute-long rambling of words. I mean, this is the guy that represents America to the rest of the world. I mean, look at that's the reason why we're in so many situations we're at, because this guy is now the ruler of the free world, quote unquote.
So let me ask you this: there's two schools of thought. Number one is the Democrat Party. They had 18 candidates at the very beginning. This is who they settled on, and they thought this was a good idea. Or there's what I call a game maker, and they thought this was a good idea.
Yeah.
So either one of those theories, I ask you, why do you think out of all the options that they have to put as we'll call him a puppet president, why him?
That's a good question. It's very thought-provoking because there could be a number of motives behind it, because he could be just the ultimate distraction. He could also be a reason why we see a lot of the things happening outside of America starting. So him being in that position has incited a lot of events that are happening globally. If someone else had been picked, it wouldn't have happened, but it's because he's there. These events have now unfolded and started to happen. But ultimately, I would say it's to weaken America even further. I think that was the ultimate goal, because these game makers, I don't think, are attached to any country. I think they have been able to detach from any nationality and patriotism or any form of nationalism. They don't have any of that. They strictly have their agenda, their best interest in heart, and that's it. And I think it expands across borders. It's not something attached to one specific country. So I think they just want to weaken America further, because America for the longest time has been the symbol of hope for pretty much everywhere else across the world. Symbol of freedom. You know, you can come to this America, have your own opinion, have your own voice, have your own thoughts, and you're allowed to have them. Nowhere else in the world can you say that confidently, that you will not be persecuted for your opinions, your thoughts, freedom of speech, whatever it is. So they're still trying, because we still have it, even though they've been trying to attack it for decades now, but we still have that choice. I still have this ability to make the show. I still have a voice. They need that to be gone. So having him as the head of the presidency, or having him as a president, I think allows them to further dismantle the freedom of speech and the freedoms we have here in America.
I think I asked this question to somebody, and they told me it's because they don't care. Meaning, they don't care that we figured out the game is rigged. They have so much power. Because if you look at the male or female ego, there's a point when we have enough ego where we think as we evolve whatever it is we're doing. You take a prize fighter, for example. I love the prize fighters that don't talk smack. I'm old school. I like the guys that go out and fight. They do all their talking I understand why they do some of what they do. But to me, even though it's theater, it's annoying. These game makers, I think, they're like, hey, it doesn't matter whether you know that I'm screwing you, because I'm still going to screw you. And that's what they're doing to society. And you're right. We are the last great hope. The United States was an experiment. And in essence, there are things that we have done and we have succeeded at when we shouldn't have succeeded at. And instead of highlighting the things that we've done, I mean, we could sit here for hours and list some great things that we've done. And we could also list some things that we are guilty of. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those things have nothing to do with you and me. Mm-hmm. Our founding fathers, some of them, there were some bad things that happened. But you and I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And there are some offsetting things that our founding fathers did that they get no credit for. I mean, you look in the Civil War, look at how many people died in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Okay. You look at how many people, there are countless stories of people that have done great things to help minorities, to help weak, that they don't get credit for. Mm-hmm. But it's because the game makers, they keep controlling everything and they create chaos. And so they can, going back to resources. Let me get all the resources. And there's one thing that's very important. It's called mobility. Toyota just released, and I haven't done a price point. They've released a hydrogen motor for a car. Basically, you fill a tank up with hydrogen, it produces energy, and the byproduct is water. Mm-hmm. So it spits out water. Okay, that's the byproduct. And we've had the technology out for a long time, for many, many years. The problem that you have is hydrogen cars. You have this high compressed volatile tank of fuel, but we do have natural gas. We do have propane that we're doing this exact same thing. Mm-hmm. But they've created better technology for that. But there's this huge push for electric cars. Well, electric cars, what does it do? It restricts your mobility. And why is this important?
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. I had a conversation with Jason Jones, who was on our show. Jason Jones was a DPS 20 plus years. He was down on the border. He's working for Newsmax. He is the foremost expert on the cartel family, on the fentanyl, and the human trafficking and drugs coming across this border. And he had a nice conversation with a state senator from California. I actually saw him say this at the Capitol building about 6 months ago. I don't remember which senator. He may have mentioned him. But he also told this story on our show. He was talking to them, trying to have a conversation about the border. And this senator kept saying, no, we don't have that problem. And he says, have you ever been down there? And the guy says, no. He says, I tell you what, if you spend it, I promise you, it'll be a great field trip. It'll be a great learning. Just come down there with me. And the guy went down there with him. And this was a Democrat who truly believed that he wanted to make his state a better state. He was working for the people, but he believed that there was no problem down there. And when he got down there, he was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And so if you reduce people's mobility, if you have a train crash, see, that train that crashed in East Palestine, Ohio, no, it was Ohio, wasn't it?
Yep.
It had no bearing on you and me in Texas. Now, we saw it, but it was one-dimensional. Mm-hmm. If you go down to the border and if you've seen the amount of trash, just the trash alone that they're producing, okay, that trash alone, and you know the amount of fentanyl. I mean, last year, they captured enough fentanyl on one bus.
I think everyone, right?
To kill everyone twice. It was 76 pounds of fentanyl, over 1 million tabs. It was pure fentanyl, 1 million tabs, 4 million cash, some guns and some hand grenades, some other stuff. And then in Texas, collectively for the same year, they had enough to kill Americans over one time each. That was from Dr. John Spires. The last I heard, Jason Jones, in January, it was 104,000 deaths from fentanyl. And then I think then 2 months later, it was 116,000. And he said, hey.
In a month?
In a year. Oh. But what he said was the reason we don't have the exact number is that there are so many morgues that are behind in doing autopsies that the number keeps growing. So in a year's time, we had over 100,000 deaths. And in Vietnam, that's throughout crazy. So many years, it was like, well, I think 50 to 60,000 deaths.
Yeah.
At its peak for drug problems, it's been in the 10 to 15,000 range. But yet we don't see this as a problem because our logical thinking is not working. And
it's a huge problem.
And it goes back to there's nothing to see here, folks. And the amount of fentanyl that it takes, a couple of grains of sand, it will kill you. And so the Chinese are providing the materials. In Mexico, they're manufacturing. So they're basically doing mixology. This is something I have experience with from a business, manufacturing. And then they have these pill devices. They're not following what's called CGMP or ISO 22000 or ISO 9006. There's like 4 or 5 different manufacturing standards. They're not following that. They're over there with probably a screwdriver. If there's any stuff stuck in any of those pill things, they're popping out and then they're redoing it.
Yep.
They're not controlling their concentrate. And so if you're going to take fentanyl as a street drug, you're playing Russian roulette.
Yeah.
But this isn't a problem in America. You know what a problem is other things that are what I call distraction, which you are observing as well. We're fighting over race. We're fighting over religion. We're fighting over sexuality. All these things that don't impact us on a regular basis, like the economy, which is impacting us, politics, voting. Those things impact us. Energy, that impacts us. The price of energy impacts everybody on a regular basis. Fuel, that sort of thing. So if I can reduce your mobility, I can get comfortable in my own bubble. And if there's any pain there, I'm already used to it. It's kind of like living in Texas. I've grown up here all the time. People come down here in July, they're like, dang, it's hot as hell.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, it's hot. We deal with it. Because we're used to it. Mm-hmm. So if you limit where people go, this is why they want to get us an electric car, so we can't travel and see what's going on.
I smiled when you first said that, because I talked about this with someone like a week ago about why I would never get an electric car. If I do, I would always have gas powered cars as well. Like I would not just strictly have electric vehicles, and I'm not going to ever move to completely having electric vehicles, because you can't travel from here to Florida if you need to go to Florida with an electric car. It's going to take you 3 days to get to Florida if you need to charge your car every 350 miles. And exactly what you said is what I told this person. I was like, they're trying to keep you within your bubble. Like it's easier to control someone if you can't escape, if you can't run away and go somewhere else. If you have electric cars, you can't just leave the state. And, if they're attacking us here, you can't just run away to Florida if all you have is an electric car. You're going to have a gas powered vehicle and get the hell out of there as quickly as you can. So it's easier to control people who can't move. And so that's what I'm trying to tell this guy. I was like, shouldn't just have an electric car. You should probably have a gas powered car, because when shit hits the fan, I'm going to be in Florida and you're going to be stuck in Arkansas charging your Tesla when they pull up on you and take your ass, to the concentration camp or wherever they take you. So it's so true. Like these little things and the way they paint the picture is so pretty that people just don't see the bullshit behind it, because they're just like, oh wow, that sounds beautiful. It sounds amazing. Because I'll tell you one thing. People who push these agendas, and majority of them are coming from the left, they know how to talk, man. They know how to paint a damn picture, and they know how to get people emotionally invested into a ideology. They are so good at that, and it's a skill, because that's a great skill to have no matter where you're at in life, just being able to draw a reaction from someone and have them connect to a theme or connect to a thought or connect to an idea. Anyone who masters that skill will be the best salesman, will be the best marketer. No matter what industry you're in, you master that skill of being able to draw out emotional reactions, because no matter what the emotion is, drawing out emotion automatically makes that person connect with that thing, product, idea, whatever it is, whether it's negatively or positively. They're still connected to it now because they've emotionally attached themselves to it. And so the left is really good at that. And the people who paint these pictures for them, where when I look at a topic and I'm logically and analytically looking at it and saying that's wrong, someone I know in my life will say, no, that's right, because of what they've been told and how they've connected to this thought or this idea. And it's crazy to me how good they are at that, how skilled they are at just getting people to connect with their ideas. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
You see it, right?
I do. And I think for me, I like to keep life simple. Everything's simplified. When you start looking at some of these things, they try to make them complicated. You talk about climate change. I think we have a real issue with our planet. Okay. It's not climate change. It's the amount of trash that's in the ocean. Mm-hmm. Okay, they say there's enough ocean the size of Texas. On TikTok I follow, there's a ship that goes out there and it picks it up, and it's always showing these huge nets that are dumping mountains of trash on the ship. I think it's a great call. Mm-hmm. But yet they want to position us to where we're all paying the government more money And what I don't see is somebody putting money into cleaning the trash that coming across the border, that's coming the west. A lot of that trash is coming from India and China, the biggest polluters on the planet, and it's hitting the West Coast. Okay. So I think there is a real problem with our planet, but it's not climate change. Mm-hmm. We have a trash problem. We've got, if you speak to Tim James, who is a famous guy who has a product take supplement, but he studied with a lot of really smart people, and every single water source we have on the planet is contaminated with plastic, with microplastic. You can go 300 miles away from civilization in Alaska, that's the water, it's got microplastic. And so that really bothers me. You look at what we're putting in our food supply. There are a lot of products in America that we eat, and I'm gonna use like Mountain Dew is one, Skittles is another. They have products that are in them that you can't get in Europe because they don't allow them because they're deadly to us. These various preservatives. So the more and more you start researching these things, again, they're distractions because somebody's making a pile of money. Ultimately, though, what does this all mean? Well, when you look at that, the best business model, when you're building a business, greatest business model is reoccurring. Mm-hmm. I learned this because I was in banking. We were credit card processing. It's a great business. And so if you look
you elaborate on that. Let me use the restroom.
Ultimately, we were a huge company. And at the time, I had about 350 employees working for me. I had 5 managers. I was driving, listening to talk radio, going to work, and they said that at the time, it was over 70%, like 73, 75% of all adults were on some sort of medication like Xanax or Ritalin. I thought the number was high. And so that day, when I ran into our head of HR, I asked her, I just said, hey, I heard this factoid. What do you think? And she says, yeah, I see all the bills because I can't tell you who's using them. Yeah, you're dead on. That's about right. And I'm shocked because at that stage of my life, I hardly even took an aspirin.
Yeah.
I just sucked it up. So I had my team meeting that week. And once a week, I'd have my team meeting. I had 5 managers. And I'm telling them this. Well, they proceed to tell me which one of them was taking whatever and who. I'm like, I don't need to know. And they go, yeah, everybody's taking these. And I was shocked about it. And that's always stuck in the back of my mind. But if you look at a lot of the moves that you're seeing, one thing that, for example, if you look at the jab, look at how many people are now suffering from. You look at the last 10 years, a commercial for medicine, the disclaimer is longer than there's so many. If you look at all the news shows, they're all sponsored by medical industry.
Big pharma.
Yeah. If you go back to, so I just pulled up a couple of stocks back in during the Obama administration. And I think one of them was, wasn't Blue Cross, like Cigna. It was a couple of healthcare providers, and they were trading in the $20 or $30 range. Well, they're all over $100 now. So if you look at their stock symbol for like the last 5 years, it's jacked. Yeah. And there's not a lot of industries that you can go that have had that much exponential growth. But if you look at big pharma, it does, and the medical industry. And if you look at what I paid in medical insurance for a family back when I was in the corporate world, it was very reasonable. Today, it's astronomical. It's 4 times what I was paying when I worked. And the other common thing is I look around at how many people I know that are taking ongoing medication. It could be for blood pressure, it could be for anxiety, it could be for a number of things. And they seem all legitimate. But if you go back into the 20s, all medicine was holistic up until the oil industry. The oil industry really drove because initially oil, a lot of those products were used for pharmacy. They weren't used for cars because nobody had cars. Mm-hmm. So you had Rockefeller, I believe, who was pushing the campaign, he started pushing out campaigns to the doctors to get them to quit using holistic, using their products. And eventually, now the stigma is holistic medicines are bad. They don't do anything. And it's almost like the government saying Bitcoin bad. It's the exact same thing. But yet there are people making tons of money in cryptocurrency. But now they're saying crypto bad. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're saying that is they want to move us to their own digital.
Yeah, that new BRICS currency too, probably.
Which, working in what I did, I have a pretty decent understanding of chicanery going. Whenever they did the Dodd-Frank Act, issued the Durbin Amendment. At that time, I was on the advisory board to the Fed. So every month I would be on a Zoom call with Ben Bernanke and a whole bunch of other really smart people. And they implemented the Durbin Amendment. Basically, the Durbin Amendment at the time was they capped debit transactions, whether they were what they call online or offline debit, at about 76 cents. Like so many pennies plus 10 basis. Anyway, it was about 76. So in essence, what they were saying is if you're a business, all you could charge that business was 76 cents for interchange. Okay. And there's what they didn't tell you. So this is Congress making this decision. Now, I was a reseller of that. Now, I could charge whatever I wanted, but interchange could only charge me 76 cents. I could resell it for wherever I wanted. So for some clients, we gave them a better deal than they should have gotten. And for some clients, we did. Because they came in and they said, we're going to regulate what you're spending. In the meantime, from a financial perspective, we were told that we're going to control these expenses for you. Didn't change what I'm charging, or in some instances, in many instances. But what was interesting about all that is in our meetings, Ben Bernanke asked, they had I don't remember what college, but they had a think tank from a college and they did all this analysis. And he said, well, how's this going to impact their business? He says, well, we know that if you tell the banks they can't charge X here, what they're going to do is they're going to charge the consumer in a different manner because they have predicted their annual, when you're a publicly traded company or if you're a large corporation, you say, okay, I'm going to do my budget for next year. I'm going to predict I'm going to make this much money each quarter. Yep. And if we don't reach that number, it's going to impact. We have a fiduciary responsibility to produce that much revenue. Otherwise, we're going to have to lay people off, reduce our expenditures, all the things that you do as a business. Whether you're big or small, you do the same thing.
Yep.
And lo and behold, I remember when after this was implemented, within 2 months in California and Washington and Oregon, I think they implemented it was some weird debit fee of $5 a month on the West Coast. It lasted for about 2 weeks and people were revolting. So they moved their business model from the business to the consumer. And I saw Dodd speak at the ETA, which is the Electronic Transaction Association convention, probably about 10,000 people watching him. He had just retired. He went from being in the financial world in the Senate to he was now the president of the Screen Actors Guild Award. I'm like, how did you go from that to this really great job in California? And we could probably get into another conversation about that later. But then what he said was, he goes, we implemented this legislation and then we stood back to see if it would work. And I was like, what? He said this in front of 10,000 people or more. And I don't think anybody really got it. It's like, you implemented something.
It was an experiment.
It was an experiment. And so now we're talking about digital currency, and you have people making decisions on something that they are not subject matter experts at. Mm-hmm. They act like they are, but they're not.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I've never heard of a survey that says, hey, do you want to convert off of a completely go completely paperless? Well, for the most part, we are, because we can use Venmo and the other Zelle and those other products. But it's nice to be able to have some cash. We all like cash, but they want to get rid of that. Why do they want to get rid of that? They could say, well, there's a cost per paper. There, all these lame excuses. But what it really boils down to, they now can Think they got control of our lives now? Man, imagine just like your Tesla. Let's say you're driving your Tesla and it dies, doesn't work. Oh, I've got all my money is here, doesn't work.
Yeah.
What's your alternative solution? You're screwed.
Yep, exactly.
You know, today, if you're screwed, you can at least go to an ATM machine and you can stick your card in,
Get some cash.
and get some cash if you need to. There's solutions, but it gives them a level of control that I am totally uncomfortable. I am not comfortable with that at all. Even so that there have been 2 states that have talked about, Texas and Florida have talked about dealing with this in some way, shape, or form. Outlawing, it's called the CDDC. Am I saying that right? I can't remember what that. Anyway, I'll think of it later. But that, to me, when you look at big pharma, you look at the currency, all these things are about control.
Yeah.
And look at, if you look at big pharma, you look at banking, if you look at these large titan industries, they're lobbying Congress. They're lobbying Washington. They're not representing you and I. We have no representation whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay. The little guy. And that's the funny thing. If you listen to Michael Moore, he does this really great speech you can pick up on TikTok. And basically, Donald Trump stood in front of the automakers, the labor unions, and said a lot of praiseful things about Donald Trump, only because he said he was the only person that said to the auto unions, if you move your manufacturing plants to Mexico, I'm going to tax you 25%. And they don't care about anything else, because the little guy throughout history has always been the ones that are getting screwed. They always talk about, we need the little guy, yet the farmers are getting screwed. Police officers are getting screwed. Or first responders are getting screwed. You got the nurses and the people on the front lines in the healthcare getting screwed. Everybody, all the little guys are getting screwed, but yet collectively they are the biggest voting bloc and they're the biggest horsepower to making this country great.
Yeah.
And we have zero representation. That's what upsets me.
Yeah, that's the country was founded on, well, having representation. I mean, we are supposed to be represented by the government, not the government is represented by us. That's somewhere along the line it got backwards, where they should always have our best interests in heart, but now it seems like we're supposed to have the government's best interests in hearts in the way we live our lives, and it's getting very out of hand. But I do want to go back to the child trafficking issue. You know, before we wrap up, I wanted to make sure that we covered that, because I did have some questions, more overarching questions rather than specifics. But the main thing that I would like to know about V for CR is, what's the plan? You know, like when you see the issue, we all see the issue at hand, right? There's children being manipulated, children being taken advantage of, children being, victims of horrible things, mainly the trafficking. What's the overarching plan? Like, how are you guys attacking the large scale operations like we saw with the Epsteins? Like, do you guys have foots in the doors to make headway into those kind of rings? Or is it more you're targeting local aspects of the human trafficking? Kind of what is the plan as to the operations of V4CR? Like, what is the overall plan?
Okay, so our strategy, there are 3 pillars that we focus on, really 2 pillars. Number one is our media presence.
Mm-hmm.
And when Craig set out originally, he set out to make Contraland. We have a movie, a documentary,
Yep.
It can be seen for free, contralandmovie.com. And in his mind, he thought, well, I'm going to make this movie and I'll be done. At that time, nobody was talking about child trafficking. It was prevalent. It's estimated between the foundation we work with Dr. Judith Reisman, they at the time when we made the movie, it was estimated $38 to $50 billion. We think it's significantly greater, well over $150 billion internationally. I mean, worldwide. Okay, we think it's probably closer to $100 billion. But unfortunately, they're not filing their taxes, and we have no government agency that can figure that out. So we're working on radio, We don't have a podcast yet, but we've got everything we need to do a podcast. We've got a TV show we have a pretty good social media presence. And then we run counter-trafficking operations. We have a lot of grander ideas on a bigger scale that we're in the works. I can't really get into those details, but here's something that's very important. I want you to think about this. We need horsepower. And earlier I said that there are two layers of horsepower I think that is needed. Number one, if you go to big tech, there's a lot of horsepower we can get. But we really need horsepower from the masses, because the masses define change. Mm-hmm. Right now, you had the biggest trophy fish was Epstein. What's happened with that? Nothing. So we could go and take down an it. What's going to happen? Mm-hmm. Until we can get everybody, or a large portion of people in society, to lock arms, circle our kids, and say enough is enough, and stop this from happening, and agree to push forward and to persevere and hold our decision makers, our policy makers, accountable for their actions, for their participation or lack of participation. And it's fruitless to some degree. So yes, we're trying to build up a groundswell, and I think it's really starting to stick, because we run into a lot of everywhere we go.
From who? Is it policymakers?
It could be policymakers. It could be law enforcement. It could be Hollywood or movie makers. It could be, I'll give you a great example. We've tried to get our Contraland onto all the streaming platforms. It's been impossible. For example, we try to get it on Amazon Prime. The very first rejection letter we got from them said that you do not own this intellectual content. It was our movie. We made it. We paid for it. And so the fourth response we got to them was very ambiguous. The third response was, we're not doing any more documentaries.
That's bullshit.
Oh, yeah. So we run into this, kind of give you an example. Craig, he started V4CR as a nonprofit because when he says, I'm just going to make this movie. And he was working in Hollywood at the time. He was on Top Shot. He was on Gunny Time. He was on Rhino Wars on the Discovery Channel. He did 10 years in that Discovery Channel, Rhino, that channel area, that space. And so he had a lot of connections, made Contraland. But at the time, the very first fundraiser he tried to crowdfund it. They wouldn't let him crowdfund it. Mm-hmm. Okay. He actually went on to, which would be considered controversial today, but Alex Jones did a live stream on Facebook. In less than 2 minutes, they kicked him off of Facebook. Alex Jones wrote a check for $100,000. And if you look at the credits, we highlight, he wrote us a check for $100,000 for Contraland. Mm-hmm. Biggest contribution we've ever gotten. And so we were very grateful for him, because he's
awesome.
He just got pissed off. It's like, you just shut me down. Well, I'll just write that check myself. We're grateful that he was able to do that. But it just goes to show that this is such an important thing that we're fighting, and for us to be successful at it, everybody has to be on the same frequency. You need to have the masses on the same frequency. So today, we're running counter-trafficking operations. We're capturing content that we can show you. And what I tell people all the time, I have people that come to me and they say, I'm thankful for what you're doing, but I couldn't watch the movie. And I tell them, I said, look, I'm going to say something that is going to hurt your feelings. I want you to watch the movie. Let me tell you why. Because this is not important until it's your kid. Yeah. And I don't want to have that conversation. Exactly. Because every survivor I've had to deal with, every survivor that our teams have had to deal with, they all wish that they had done something. I can tell you in my own personal life, there are things I can go back. I wish I would have done it differently. And so this gives you a look into the world that you need to be aware of so you can avoid making the mistakes. Why this is the biggest threat. I talked about dopamine driven, but also you're allowing a child predator into your house, and you do not even. There are if it used to be the predators used to go to the park with the trench coat. Now they have got easy access into your child's life, and they can groom them, they convince them. What is grooming? Number one is, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you like me better than you. If I get to that point, then I've got control over you. Then I can get a face-to-face. Then I can violate you, start doing things to you. I can traffic you, whatever I want to do. And this is the conduit to that. Your internet, your tablets. Anybody that I tell now that has kids that are going to have kids, do not get them a smartphone till they are 18 years old. Okay, well, how am I going to get a hold of them? You can text and you can call on a flip phone.
All you need.
You're going to be hated. You're going to be your parents you're going to be the worst parents. But the people that I know that I'm proud of their kids that are doing really well, they were book readers. Because reading a book teaches you patience. It teaches you logic skills. Read a book, you've got to read the whole thing to get to the end. Kids aren't watching movies anymore. They're watching TikTok. They're getting back to back to back. Getting a kid to watch a movie these days is almost impossible because it's too long. They cannot sit down and watch a movie.
Yep.
But what else can't they do? They can't sit down and do their taxes. They can't sit down and balance their checkbook because it's not dopamine driven. And so the phone, I don't think that people realized what this was. I think that it seemed like a good idea at the time as they were evolving the product. I think when Facebook created the like button, they thought it was a good idea. And it seemed like a good idea. Somebody figured out how to capitalize on it. And so now it's an evil thing. If you talk to some of these folks at Facebook and Twitter, these high-ranking, their kids don't have smartphones. They don't have accounts on Facebook and Twitter, which is interesting. You talk to some of the Hollywood actresses and actors. Is your kid online? No. They know. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So that's one of the things that. So Veterans for Child Rescue, we're focusing on education, counter trafficking, spreading the word. We're working. You have plans for some of these other things, but we're trying to build up the horsepower because you start getting into that world. I need people that will lock arms and, we've had to deal with trolls before. We've had legal actions. This year, we got a judgment against somebody for $500,000. 2 years ago, we got $4.1 or $4.3 million against somebody. And these are trolls that go out and spread lies about us. And we prove that they don't, but it's a distraction. Okay. So until we get everybody on the same frequency, pushing ahead, surrounding our kids, locking arms and saying enough is enough. We are the only species on this planet that I can think of that is sacrificing our kids.
Yeah.
Go get between a mama bear and her cub and see what happens, or a lioness and her cub. Let's see how that works out for you. So we should have the same, and there are some great people in society that we're seeing today, especially at the school boards. You're seeing mamas who are looking at their curriculums. They're asking questions. They're being labeled domestic terrorists. They're getting sued. Okay. There are people that this is happening to because they're asking questions. Why are you teaching? Why are these books, which is considered pornography? There are books in our schools in every state. If you don't know this, go just do a quick search on social media and you'll find examples, videos of people being shut down, moms and dads reading content. They'll read the content of a book that is in their school. They went and checked out and they said, hey, they're teaching my kids how to masturbate. They're in elementary school. They're teaching our kids how to do oral sex. Why is this in there? And the board of directors, they're like, next, here, your time is up next. I'm going to have to escort you out. And until these school boards are removed and people are all on the same page, this isn't going to happen to our kids. We're moving towards that, but I think that's more important today. Not only our organization, but there are other organizations. And this show itself, I hope that when people look at this, they'll say, okay, how do I get involved? I'm going to go check out all the organizations that I can support. I'm going to learn what I can, and I'm going to demand that our kids are being treated like kids. They should be able to grow up. They should be able to learn to ride bikes, throw a football, a baseball, all the things that we did as kids. They want to do kid stuff. We don't need to sexualize our kids. They got plenty of that when they're an adult. They should be kids.
What's the biggest thing you guys see as how children are being targeted by traffickers? Like, what's the number one way that they get, I guess, snatched or coerced or taken advantage of?
Well, our kids are soft targets. So what's a soft target? Single home, LGBTQ, minorities. Those three are very, could be a combination could be a combination of those things. It could be any one of those things. But what you find is that, and look, there are a lot of single dads and a lot of single moms raising their, God bless them. You cannot control your circumstance. However, whenever you're in that situation, you're not concerned about their content that's going through phones. What happens then is that you get this groomer that comes in and says, it's easy for you to say something to the effect, hey, what's bothering you? If you ask any kid what's bothering you, and they're online, they're like, if we're looking at each other, we're 12 years old and I ask you what's bothering you, it's hard to talk about because it's hard to advocate for yourself. When you're online and you could think about it, dad's being a dick. Well, you could say that just about it as a preteen. Dad's being a dick, mom's being ugly. It's easy to do because you didn't get your way. Okay. Friday night, everybody's going to the skating rink. I didn't get to go because I didn't do my chores. So mom's being mean. Dad's being mean. Once you start doing that, it's like, okay, so you know what? If you live with me or, if I were your dad, you would always get to go skating. I would make sure you had money. Oh, you don't have an iPhone? Oh, all my kids have iPhone. Mm-hmm. You say the opposite. You're creating this fantasy world. And once you get to that point where you can groom them, like if you are an LGBTQ category child, it's very likely that you're not getting the love in your home, mainly because the dynamic between you and your parents may be stressed. Mm-hmm. Okay? I'm not saying that all homes are like that, but there's a high percentage of that. And so when there's high stress in the home, it's easy to identify that high stress. And once you identify that high stress, start working against that. Okay, well, I know you have high stress because this is the lifestyle that you're in, because you're in that lifestyle. There's stress. Therefore, how do I capitalize on that? And it all goes back to making you feel important. It could be how you dress. It could be some sort of a device or acceptance. It's very simple. But once they start doing that, then it's always about getting a face-to-face. Okay, and there are kids that are going to school. They've got both their mom and their dad. They're going to school, and then they're getting picked up after school. They're saying, oh, I'm in an after-school program. They're going out turning tricks, and they're going home and rinse and repeat. And wow. The parents don't even know that. They did a study I witnessed at an event, an anti-trafficking event here in Houston last year. A professor from the University of Houston hosting it, Kevin Clemente, and somebody that presented. They did a study in 2000 and I think it was 15. There was 800 students that they identified in San Diego that were being trafficked. They didn't do anything about it. They just did a study. They identified it. Didn't do anything about it. So if it's happening in one city, it's got to be happening in a lot of places. And if you go speak to, if you do any investigation with the gangs, today the gangs are migrating. If you talk to gang task force units, they're moving off of drugs into trafficking because they don't have to procure their product. They just have to manage their product, and that would be your kids. Yeah. And so the average kid can bring anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000 a year in tricks.
Just one.
So you can manage 4 or 5. You've got some muscle. You got somebody who's running your crew. So it's a female who's managing your 3, 4, 5 boys and girls. She's kind of like Mama Bear. Treat her a little bit differently than everybody else, but of course they've been turned out and beat up. It's this extreme. What happens is if I give you extreme love and I beat your ass extremely, you have this dopamine. Yeah. You get into these dopamine cycles.
Psychological.
When you do that, if you ever talk to people that were in an abusive relationship, I have talked to people that were in an abusive relationship. And what happens is once they decide to leave and get out of that environment, after about 3 to 6 months, they're like, man, I don't know why I put up with any of that, because they had built up a tolerance to it. And so the game that they play is a lot of love, and then it's kind of guerrilla. It's all over the board, but whatever works, they're like salespeople. They kind of learn what affects you and how it works, and then that's the game that they. So
is it like mainly Instagram, Facebook,
Snapchat, Roblox, some of the video gaming platforms?
Really? Wow!
I can infiltrate whatever platform you want, and I can represent myself as a kid. I could say that I'm 16 years old, but in reality, I could be 50 years old. And eventually I could reveal that and say, the reason I didn't do that is because I'm just looking to help people who have horrible parents. And if I put on there, I'm 50 years old, nobody's going to listen to me. I'm here to help you. You can represent yourself however you want to represent yourself, whatever story you want to spin. It's just all BS. But I will tell you this, if you're out there looking, if you hop onto a platform, there are a lot of platforms. If you hop on and you put your picture on there as a 14, 15-year-old boy or girl, in a matter of minutes, you could have 30 to 50 vile requests. I mean, imagine the vilest thing you could say to somebody. If you have a mate, you have a physical relationship that you're married, or if you have a mate, and the things that you say behind closed doors, think of the worst thing you could ever say to them. They're coming right out of the gate saying to these kids. We have evidence of that. We have gotten convictions based upon thing, in multiple different kinds of languages. It's absolutely amazing to me. It's when we run operations, it's raining perverts. It's crazy, and most people don't know. But in a sting operation, we have one person managing 50 companies.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is sick.
It is. And
have you guys kind of, I guess I'm assuming when you come in contact with the traffickers or the groomers, whatever it is, whether that's through
whatever we're going after, right?
Mm-hmm.
We go after various.
Yeah, whether that's through an arrest or just through conversation or what have you guys found in terms of their psychology behind why they do what they do? What kind of headway have y'all made in terms of like understanding the behavior patterns and decisions of these sick individuals?
Well, there's a common variable that many of them admit. It all starts with porn. And pornography, in essence, that's a dopamine-driven product. So you watch porn, you get physical gratification, you get a dopamine injection. The problem with dopamine, this is where what people don't really understand is the more dopamine you get, the more you need. And therefore, what happens then is if you were to take just straight whatever you're watching, let's just say it's I don't really know how to describe it. Let's just say, I hate to say the word normal because that could mean a lot of things.
Amateur porn.
Porn. Okay. After a while, you kind of get numb to it. So then you start getting into stuff that's a little more risque. And eventually it leads you to the crazy stuff. And when you get into crazy stuff with kids and this sort of thing, you have this demand for self-gratification or some sort of gratification. And because you're not getting enough, it's almost like, okay, well, my last adventure wasn't as good as the one before that. And so that's what, by watching porn, if you go to the traditional relationship, and if you're working very diligently to court a person, court them, ultimately you get married, it takes you a while to get to that point to where you get into a sexual or physical relationship. And so that patience allows you to appreciate the intimacy of who you are with. But if you can get it anytime, anywhere, anyhow, you don't appreciate it. You don't. So your you have this offset of dopamine, and it doesn't lead anywhere good. So that's the one thing that when you talk to people that are subject matter experts in this field, every person that I've ever spoken to and proposed that's what they are. The people they've interviewed in the psychiatry world. When you speak to survivors, it all goes back to that's where a big nexus is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's crazy. It's certainly crazy. And here's the interesting thing about it. What's interesting about it is, if you watch network TV, they have regulations on network. So main channels, NBC, CBS, ABC. There are certain words you can't say. There are certain things you can't view. Now on cable TV, you can. However, on this, there are zero restrictions for minors. Zero restriction.
Yeah.
And so why isn't it as a society? Why isn't the government? Government loves to regulate everything, but they're not regulating porn to our kids. There's another area. So what's interesting is when you hear stories, like I have a friend that she's a teacher, and she was teaching third grade, and she had to more than one incidents where she third graders had sex. In
Third graders?
Third graders. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And so if you start talking to teachers, typically in now, I have a friend that was probably about 10 years ago. She married a guy who was a vice principal at a college, at a high school. And this guy was from Iowa. He played line. Guy's like 6'6" and 340 pounds, big old boy. And he was explaining to me, about being sit downs with parents. I said, so what's the craziest thing you've ever heard? He goes, oh, about once a week we catch somebody having sex. And so these are high school kids. So that's okay. And I'm like what, in the parking lot? No, in the stairwell, in the bathroom. I'm like, really? Are you kidding me?
He says, bold out here.
And then he's like, well, that's not the craziest thing. He says, I'm sitting there having this conversation with the parents, and I'm telling the parents, like a police report, this is what I witnessed your child doing. And they're all like, they're putting their lawyer hat on because they're going to be expelled for a period of time. That's what we do when that happens. And they're putting on their lawyer hat, and they say, well, what's our alternative? Like, I don't want my kid to be expelled, and how do we get around this? And he goes, well, the alternate is I can file a police report, and then they're going to have this on their record. And all of a sudden, they're okay to be expelled. But the interesting thing is that the position that the parents take, I can tell you this much. I did some stupid things when I was a kid. Nothing like that. But I can tell you, when my parents were told, I got my butt whipped.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember when I was in the 6th grade, somebody stole this little cymbal instrument from choir, and they were showing it to us on the bus. And in my mind, I was going to help them get rid of the evidence, and I threw it out the window. Well, I got caught, and I got kicked out of choir. I got my butt beat by my parents, and I had to pay for that little instrument. That was what I had to deal with. Yeah. I couldn't imagine anybody having sex.
Normalize whooping your kids when they do something wrong. Don't get rid of that. That's something we still need in society. Whoop your kids when they do something wrong. I turned out great. All the people I know that happened to, most of them turned out all right. So make sure it's done, because I see people are trying to step away from that. They're saying, "Oh, it's child abuse" or whatever it is. But yeah.
I only one time in my life I got a whooping. I didn't deserve it, but I figured there were some things I got away with.
Yeah.
So net effect.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at like 2.5 hours, probably pretty close to that. Yeah. So we can go for hours, but I do know you have some statistics.
I didn't know if there was anything else I wanted to cover. I will say that I'll just throw out some statistics.
Let's throw some out there.
The vast majority of sex trafficking victims are women and girls, though men, boys, trans, intersex, non-binary victim as well. I think boys are underreported.
Yeah.
Because I think the stigma of a man, we meet a lot of survivors that Craig meets, especially in the spec ops community and in Hollywood. And as a matter of fact, I just met somebody last week, and they just volunteered. I don't ask. I'm never going to ask you like that, but I've had people volunteer, and I asked them, well, why are you telling me now? I mean, you're 30, 40, 50 years old. Because you're doing something about it. I never told anybody because nobody would do anything about it, or I was afraid that the stigma
Being a boy.
being a boy. So there are over 4 million victims of sex traffic globally. A study from the United Nations International Labor Organization estimates 3.8 million adults and 1 million children were victims of forced sexual exploitation in 2016.
Wow.
So we know that number is going.
What?
According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 1 in 7 of the more than 23,500 runaways reported to the nonprofit organization were likely victims of child sex trafficking. Estimated, now this was in 2014, they were estimating it at $99 billion spent.
Wow.
So that was in 2014. We're almost 10 years ahead of that. So it's well north of
100 billion.
Yeah. I spoke to a guy on a podcast on Saturday, and he said, you're talking about GDP level numbers.
Yeah. Of a country. Yeah.
Of a country. Whereas we have Homeland Security, but we should have a department of there should be a department in this country exclusively with the numbers that we're talking about fighting against the
$100 billion per year for the viewers to equate it to something they can relate to is more than all the professional sports leagues combined in what they generate. So trafficking of children is making more than all your favorite sports organizations, MLB, NBA, UFC, all the different
NFL,
boxing promotions, NFL combined. Child trafficking is generating more revenue than those on a yearly basis. Insane.
It is insane.
Well, I know that I appreciate you guys doing what you do and just constantly fighting the good fight and trying your best to expose this, bring it to the light, and hopefully we'll start seeing some headway. And really the biggest thing I can hope for is that more people will actually give a damn about it, because like you said, people don't give a shit about it until they're kid, when they should give a shit about it just generally about all the kids, because it's not about until it happens to you. It should be, this is a problem, period, no matter whose kid it is. So I hope that more people become more aware and more willing to kind of engage in this kind of stuff. So, I definitely appreciate you coming on, and always great talking to you. I feel like we have some awesome conversations. Like, I learn a lot, and we get to cover a lot of range of topics, but the main thing here is, hopefully that we see some more involvement when it comes to this issue about child trafficking.
I appreciate you having me on, and I do enjoy our conversations. And I like the fact that at a younger age, you're looking around the world with your team, your circle, and asking these questions. When I was a younger person, I was just going through the motions, raising a family. So I think your approach, because here's the way I look at it. The younger generations, this is your world too. This is your world to make a place. So hopefully you'll do a better job than when we were younger. Because that's the only thing that's going to change society is all together and make society. I think the fact that you're doing this is great.
Yep. Well, I think we can squeeze in a quick game. All right, let's get started. White goes first. All right. Put that mic up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't want y'all hearing me crying when I lose.
We'll make it quick. I'm a merciful hunter. Yeah, man. Going back to what we were talking about, I swear, when I have kids, they will not be touching a smartphone until even if they're after 18, until I'm confident in their capabilities and their knowledge of the world, I would not be giving them a smartphone. I can't trust them with that.
Okay, it says pawns can only be moved forward 1 square at a time. Did you move your pawn 2 squares?
Only on the first move, they can move 2 squares. The very first move.
I probably should. Okay. Which one's this is your, I'm going
Queen.
after I really need to get your king.
Yeah, you want to trap him. Object of the game. Interesting tactic. Let's see.
That's my whole plan.
I don't like how you pulled that pawn out in front of me.
That was a
roadblock to my success.
Well, I'm just wondering, the funny thing is what I did was I said, I'm going to do something that I normally wouldn't do. Not, how can I block him from doing this?
That's funny because someone I know, first guest I had played exactly like that. He said, I'm just going to pick random moves. I don't even know what I'm doing, so there's no way you'll know what I'm doing. You are getting trigger happy with those pawns. I, on the other hand, will start incorporating my big dogs.
Is this a rook?
That is a bishop.
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 Rook. Bishops go diagonally.
Knights go L shape and the rook go straight sideways. They go linear. You know how the pawns can attack too, right? Pawns can only attack diagonally.
Pawns that can, but they can't attack
Forward.
They can move forward, but they can only attack. Oh, I didn't know that.
Exactly. So, for instance, this pawn is here.
Can
attack that one there. And like we talked about at the beginning, so many options. There's so many moves.
It doesn't look like that much, but
So many variations. You can choose a certain amount of squares. You can choose a different direction to take your pieces in. Then you have the pawns. I know he's making a ruckus over there.
I want him to come over and give me some advice.
Oh, you're talking about Mike?
No, your dog. He might be able to help me out. See, what I do know is what I have to protect. I'm just kind of figure out.
Yeah, the only problem is when you play to protect the king is when you get set up for some traps. Because then you're going to be on the defensive the entire time. And then I just need to take my time to set up an attack and draw out some of your pieces. So you want to protect, but you want to mainly try and attack the other person's king.
That's a good idea. But
The reason I did it was that way we can end the game. That's checkmate. I just needed you to move that pawn out of the way. So
why did I
close
think?
the show.
Why did I think that was too easy?
Yeah, but I love that move. I think last time we played, I hit you with that same move. Close the show right there. It's a amateur kind of like. It's like right after you get past the amateur level, it's a move that a lot of the pretty good players start
Using to attack and close the show early. You set up that move, pinch it, you can wrap it up.
All right.
This time, you'll go back home and start playing chess. This is the time. Now you'll be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to play chess from now on. But again, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Taking the drive out here and coming on the show and hanging out with us. So always appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And good game. Always. How are you going, Kobe?